Hi, everybody. Today's Friday, February 6th, 2026, and our dear friend, Ambassador Chas Freeman, is here with us. Welcome back, Ambassador.
Glad to be with you, Nima.
Let me start with one of the saddest, you know, moment in my, when I came to Iran, I was in contact with Graham Fuller because
Right.
he was concerned about the future of the region, how the region is changing here in the West Asia, and we were talking about these things. And but he was one of my eh, closest guests on this podcast. Every time we were talking behind the scene and after the talks, we were talking on many issues. And he passed away. You informed me that he passed away, and it was so sad to hear that. And
Well, I knew Graham Fuller for many years, only slightly. We ran into each other when we were both serving in the government. I was well aware. He wrote several novels, and in those novels, thinly disguised autobiographical elements in those novels made it very clear that Graham was a man of conscience. He in the CIA he served for a time as a case officer, meaning he was managing agents. And of course, the purpose of a case officer in any intelligence service is to persuade people in another society, a government, to commit treason, to be disloyal to their own society and government. For one reason or another. I mean, there are many reasons that people commit treason. Some other just want money. Some have a faith in some project or some ideology that they want to advance. Others just disagree with policy and want to change it and imagine they can do that in association with a foreign intelligence service. Well, Graham came to the conclusion. Graham was a very ethical man, and he came to the conclusion that his conscience would not allow him to perform this role. And he was then an analyst. He was a brilliant one. He had, as you indicated, he had a widespread set of interests. They extended from West Asia. He was a Turkish language officer. To China, where he also had some role. And in his last years, he left the United States. He moved first to Vancouver in Canada, and then to Montreal in Quebec. And he was enjoying that life there. He became ill. I think his daughters were with him when he passed away. But it was all a surprise and a great tragedy, I think. But I agree with you. He was someone who deserves to be remembered and remembered with respect.
we know that one of the main concerns on his part, he loved the United States of America. He wanted the United States to be a better country, to be better, in terms of the economy, in terms of the as a superpower, to be in a better position to deal with other issues, with these geopolitical issues. And one of the issues that we talk about it, before he passing away, before this happening, he was concerned about the West Asia. We know that today, as we talk, we have these sort of negotiations happening in Oman. On one side, you see they're talking about the negotiation, and something happened this time, as is Jared Kushner has joined the team, the Trump team, with Steve Witkoff, as the same happened in the case of Ukraine. And on the other hand, the Israeli media says this may be a trap, a new trap to, somehow convince Iranian that the United States or Donald Trump is trying to negotiate with Iranians and then attack Iran. What is your perception? What is your take on what's going on right now?
Well, I think Donald Trump does not know what he wants and why he's doing what he's doing. There is no policy process in Washington. There's no strategy that is developed. He has surrounded himself with yes men. It's not clear to me that even the military, who have a habit of speaking truth to power, still do that. So he has committed himself to an armada aimed at Iran, and I don't think that armada can do anything useful one way or another. Well, let me go back. What are the stated objectives? One is to, in effect, restore the JCPOA, to have a deal on nuclear matters. Well, there was one. He tore it up. I don't know why anyone in Iran would believe that if he signed another JCPOA, that he would keep his word. He changes his mind and his word with uncommon frequency. The second consideration, obviously, what is behind this is, well, one of the stated objectives is somehow to help the protests in Iran, the protesters, confront the government and either force reform or the overthrow of the government. I'll come back to that. There is no way that a military force can do that, except to do more of the same. What does more of the same mean? It means make Iranians so miserable that they feel they have no alternative to changing the regime, either by reform or by overthrow. But the track record there is very clear. If you confront Iranians like that, they rally behind their country. You mentioned Graham Fuller was a very patriotic American. He was a dissident. He did not believe in what the government in the United States is now doing, either domestically or abroad. Many Iranians probably are in the same position vis-a-vis the Iranian government. But you can't do anything useful by bombing Iran. So that is wrong. Then we come to the unstated but obvious purpose of all of this, which is to level every country that opposes Israel in West Asia, to make Israel the unchallenged hegemon of West Asia. And Iran is the principal obstacle to that. This is basically the United States being used by Israel for Israeli purposes. Or maybe it's by the United States being used by Zionists in the United States to support Israel's objective. Or maybe it's the United States using Israel somehow. I don't know. But the fact is, this is the real objective, regime change. And you can't do it with an armada off the coast of Oman, where the negotiations are taking place. That brings me to the negotiations. The people on the American side of those negotiations, Witkoff, Kushner, etc., have an unblemished record of failure. They have not accomplished anything in any negotiation that they have entered. There is no ceasefire in Gaza. There is no Israeli withdrawal. There is no Hamas disarmament. There is no government in Gaza. The idea of a real estate development in Gaza, which Jared Kushner has proposed, is absurd. It will never happen. The international force that's supposed to be in Gaza was a fiction. No one wants to join a force that is aimed at preventing Palestinian self-determination. The Ukraine war, same team, same result. You know, if this were baseball, I would say they're batting zero. They have no achievements at all of any consequence. So there they are in Muscat. The last time they were to go to Muscat, of course, this was cover for a surprise attack on Iran. You're quite right. The Israeli press remembers that, I think, with approval rather than disapproval. And they hope something like that will happen. But let me come at last to what I think may have happened. There was an agreement at Mar-a-Lago between Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump about a number of things. One of them was an arms sale package, $6 billion of basically equipment which is relevant to ground combat. It is not relevant to the Iran situation. They agreed also on to attack Iran, I think, and then wait a minute. Netanyahu probably went home and talked to his military, who are intelligent people, and they said, if we do this, we're going to pay a terrible price. We could not stop Iranian missiles at the end of the so-called 12-day war in June, and the Iranians will devastate Israel with a missile counterattack. This, of course, is exactly what Iran has been saying. And if you, I know you are still in Iran. You have had contacts with Press TV. Press TV has been very clear in its propaganda that Iran would respond to an attack on it by the United States with a huge barrage of perhaps as many as 2,000 missiles all at once to overwhelm Israeli defenses and devastate Israel. So faced with this, they agreed to delay things. They brought the Abraham Lincoln from the South China Sea. They put THAAD, the Theater High Altitude Air Defense System, in Israel. They've beefed up Israel's defense capabilities, and there they are. But they haven't altered the fundamental equation. And so I suspect, I go back to the point, I think Donald Trump painted himself into a corner. There's no obvious way out of this for him. He's threatened to attack Iran. If he does, the results will be terrible for him and for the Israelis, whom he's basically serving with this deployment and these threats. So how does this end? I don't know. I hope something comes out of the meeting in Muscat. But there, I have to say, the American side is making demands which are absolutely infeasible. Iran is not going to go to zero enrichment of uranium. Iran is not going to dismantle its missile force and make itself defenseless against Israel. Iran knows very well what would happen if it did that. It might ask the Syrians what happens if you are disarmed and you are next to Israel. So Iran is not going to sever its ties to various elements of the resistance in the region to Israeli hegemony, whether it's Hezbollah or Hamas or Yemen or the Houthis or whoever. I think Mr. Trump has created a dilemma for himself. Now, the fact that this is occurring while the Iranian leadership has huge problems with domestic unrest and ferment in Iranian society, there is no consensus in Iran anymore about anything. And so this is a very fluid situation. But I think if Mr. Trump attacks, he will clarify the situation not against the government, but in favor of it. So I don't see how any of this makes sense. And I'm just puzzled. How do we get out of this? What is the result of what has already happened in Iran, around Iran, with Israel, between the United States and Israel? And of course, we have the Gulf Arab countries, all of whom have sided basically with Iran. Do not attack Iran, they have counseled. Do not use our airspace. Do not use any base on our territory to attack Iran. So the net result of all of this is to drive a further wedge between the United States and its Arab partners in the Gulf. I don't think it strengthens relations with Israel, and it does not appear to offer Iran anything. So where do we go? I don't know. Sorry about the long ramble, but I am very perplexed.
Yeah. Here is the same, ambassador, because the government doesn't know they don't know what's happening in the mind of the Trump administration. After all, the military and the intelligence, whatever they're talking in the domestic media, they're not optimistic about any sort of talk with the Trump administration. They say nothing gonna come out of this sort of talk. It's just wasting the time, wasting everything to negotiate with. On the other hand, you see the government, they want to let the door open. They want to talk. They want to negotiate. This is a political posture on the part of the government, and these are diplomats. This is the way that they communicate. That's why they have so far they try to convince people, mostly the people that who feel that the United States would attack again, and this sort of negotiation doesn't change anything, then instead of talking with the Trump administration, you have to be prepared as much as you can to respond to any attack. And the other thing, Ambassador, is what is in the mind, what are the main points on the part of the Americans, on the part of the Trump administration, these people. Today, actually, we've seen not only Jared Kushner, but the US CENTCOM commander also joined the delegation in Moscow. And one of the things that it seems that they're asking for is that Iran should limit the export of oil to China. Al Jazeera reported on that. What is that? When you put, what has happened in Venezuela, because I think everything they're doing to Venezuela will not get to China. And right now, it seems that in these negotiations, they're seeking that on the margins of their plans, they're seeking that. But Iran is not gonna, as I see here, talking with officials, with the media, they're not gonna give up on the enrichment on on the Iranian soil. Ballistic missiles, they're not gonna negotiate on ballistic missiles. That's
No,
really the
I
dependent
think
on the existence of Iran, because if they give up on their missiles, they're gonna destroy everything here in Iran. And
no,
these are issues,
I think
non-negotiable issues on the part of Iranians.
right. I think we agree, but there is another underlying purpose here on the part of the Trump administration, or which is a personal purpose of President Trump. He wants to be the global dictator. He basically wants everybody to do what he tells them to do, and anybody who doesn't should be punished. And the rhetoric surrounding Venezuela is all about this. Now he's proposing to overthrow the government of Cuba, which is something that successive American administrations have wanted to do. Not easy. He wants to overthrow the government in Iran. He believes, the baby Shah, who has gone to Israel and has basically become an openly declared agent of Israel. Why anyone would imagine this would appeal to Iranians. Those Iranians who have called out his name basically are just saying they don't like the current government and they want something different. They don't want him. So there's no
And it's
rat.
mostly, Ambassador, sorry for interrupting you,
Go
when
ahead.
they call, these sort of, mottos, and they're talking about the situation with the economy, the
Of course.
economic difficulties that they're facing.
Of
because
course, and they're entirely right to protest. But I don't see well, first of all, it's pretty clear that the government in Tehran does not have an answer to reviving the economy under current circumstances. That is a reason to meet in Muscat to try to get some relief from the sanctions. Um, the idea that Iran would accept American dictation about where it sells its oil is ridiculous. That would reduce Iran to the level of some kind of satellite of the United States. Um, it would establish, it would negate Iran's sovereignty as much as Venezuela's sovereignty has been negated. And so, the one thing, the supreme interest of any country is to protect its national identity and its pride in itself. And Iran is in terrible condition, but it's not prepared to bend its knee to Donald Trump. So I don't know what will come out of these discussions in Muscat, but I think the Trump administration has put itself in a difficult position. I don't think it can win coming out of this. On the Iranian side, also probably can't win. So Israel can't win. I think this is a lose-lose situation that we have created, and I'm not particularly a fan of the government of Iran, but I feel sorry for them. They have very few choices, not many options, and clearly, as you said, if they can't address the economic issues, then there's very little basis for peace at home in Iran. Anyway, at this point, I don't think we know what's coming out of Muscat, if anything. But it isn't going to be another JCPOA, I don't think.
yeah. How did you find the position of the Arab states? We know that all together they try to do something to bring the United States and Iran together. On the other hand, we had Turkey as well doing the same,
Well,
and
I think
Pakistan somehow.
people in the region understand very well how easily a war, another war between Israel and the United States and Iran could affect them. The Turks, have redefined their sphere of attention to include West Asia and the Red Sea and the Horn of Africa, and of course they have a historic relationship with Iran. Arakchi was just in Istanbul and Ankara, and so Turkey has played a very active role with the Arabs, despite the fact that the Turks and the Arabs have a lot of differences, ideological differences, political differences. They all agreed, we don't want another Israeli attack on Iran, either directly from Israel or indirectly by the United States. And so, they understand very well. Of course, part of this is Iranian threats to do things to them that they don't want to have happen, destroy their oil facilities or bomb their bases or something like that. But I think it's less the fear of that than just generally, they recognize, as the foreign minister of Oman, Busaidi, said, Israel is the source of instability in the region, not Iran. Iran might once have been the source of instability when the revolution was young and people in Iran wanted to export Wilayat al-Faqih and that system of government. But that's long in the past. Iran is not trying to export its system of government now, and if it did, domestic difficulties it's experiencing in Iran would make that a very difficult task. I mean, who wants to be like Iran? Iran is miserable. So I guess the final irony here is that Pezeshkian, the president, actually wanted a very different opening to the West and reconciliation with neighbors. He's got the reconciliation with neighbors mostly because of the threat that Israel and the United States have posed to them. And so I think you saw the coalition of Iran and its Arab neighbors across the Persian Gulf basically coming together. Let's not have a war. But, you're right. In the end, Iran has no choice. It has to prepare itself for the possibility there will be a war. And it has apparently a credible deterrent. Of course, deterrence is not weapons. Deterrence is the mind of the actors involved. So if Israel understands that Iran could maim it, wound it very seriously, then Israel may be deterred. If the United States understands that in a war with Iran, it could lose many, many lives, not just on bases in the region, but maybe on the Abraham Lincoln. Question here is Iran still prepared to do what it has been doing? What it has been doing is responding in a very restrained way to attacks and provocations from Israel. It has not targeted civilian installations in Israel. It targeted military and intelligence facilities. It has not carried out a strike on an American occupied base, except in a symbolic sense, when it fired a missile at Al Udeid in Qatar. But it did that in a way that ensured that no one was killed. Is it prepared to continue to do that? I think the question is, has patience run out in Tehran? And maybe it has, because it's beset by protests, which, justified as they are, have been successfully manipulated by foreign forces. And now an American armada sitting in the Arabian Sea. Or the Gulf of Oman. So this is all pretty tense and difficult. And I think it's very easy to understand why Turkey and the Arabs tried very hard to prevent a war.
How about China and Russia? During the war in Ukraine, there was a moment, you remember, you and I talked about it, when the Russian president went to China and they hugged each other. And you've mentioned that has a particular meaning in the relationship that Russia and China have. And when you see the head of Iranian Security Council, in my opinion, which is the closest person right now to the Iranian supreme leader, going to Russia, talking directly with Vladimir Putin and sending the message. He was transferring, he was giving the message of the supreme leader of Iran to the Russian
Yeah.
president. What is happening, in your opinion, in the terms of the relationship between the two countries?
Well, I think they're very different, even though they have a common interest in supporting Iranian territorial integrity and independence. So in the case of the Russians, they had offered to the government of Iran before the last war, they had offered to bolster Iran's air defenses. Iran, for its own reasons, decided not to accept that offer. I think it has now accepted it. And so the Russians are an important supplier of weapons. to Iran. Iran has become an important source of technology, drone technology for the Russians. So there's that partnership there, which is historic because historically Iran and Russia were always competitors. Now they have been driven together by the combination of American and Israeli policies. China's a little different. China is mischaracterized in the Western press. It's said that they are supporting the Russians in Ukraine because they're providing drone parts and technology of one sort or another. And people don't realize they're also selling the same stuff to Ukraine. 90% or more of Ukrainian drones are made from parts originating in China. And so on any given day, there is a Ukrainian delegation in South China, and there's a Russian delegation, and they're both buying technology. So China is basically affirming that it is not a belligerent. It is not going to get directly involved. The same is true with Iran. China will not extend its protection to Iran. It will be happy to support Iran to the extent Iran wants its support, with technology, with weaponry, with and politically in the Security Council. But it is not going to send troops or counterattack the United States or Israel. So Iran has friends, but they're not allies. They're not committed to defend Iran. So there we are. But now we have, of course, there's quite a bit of tension in the U.S.-China relationship because of the American desire to cut China off from different supply chains and so forth. You mentioned the apparent effort to bring Iranian oil sales to a halt. So the United States is conducting an economic war against China, and then some Americans wonder why the Chinese don't think that's friendly. The Chinese probably can sympathize with Iran in terms of the application of sanctions and very unclear purposes. What is China supposed to do? I suppose it's supposed to crawl back into the caves of Yan'an and give up its modern weaponry. Same thing that seems to be asked of Iran. Disarm yourself so we can do what we want with you. No, this is not an appealing posture. Donald Trump is going to Beijing supposedly in April. There's been no confirmation of that from the Chinese. But I think they, like Iran, want to keep the door open, even if they don't think much will come of it.
And every time he talks to Xi Jinping, he says that the phone call was excellent, but Ambassador, if we put ourselves in the shoes of the Chinese government, and you see what's going on in Latin America with the case of Cuba, with the case of Venezuela right now, everything is happening in the West Asia, the Ukraine case. It all shows that the main goal is China. Somehow
That's right. And it's very clear. But then you see, this goes back to what we were talking about in the beginning. There is no policy process. There is no strategy. So various people in the administration are very hawkish about China. President Trump seems to see, he wants to show that he can manage the relationship with China, that he's, a strong man like Xi Jinping. Actually, they're quite different, of course, both their personalities and the political system. Xi Jinping is, he's a president. He presides over a Politburo. He is first among the members of that Politburo, but he's not a dictator. He can't just snap his fingers and have everybody fall into line. And China has politics too. We've just seen that in the purge of some generals in China. You get rid of generals for one of three reasons. One is they're not doing their job effectively. They're not delivering the military force or the training or whatever that you have directed them to do to produce. Another is that you think they are too big for their britches. They're perhaps building a following with which they can try to unseat you. So they're disloyal. And you suspect that. And you want to disarm them. And the third reason, of course, is that they are corrupt. But here, I'll just say, President Trump has a problem, and it's related to the armada off Iran, the Epstein files. He has to distract people from those files. And much of the discussion about those files strikes me as ridiculous. And, it's all about Trump. Well, no, it isn't. This is the entire political elite of the Western world who are shown to be depraved, corrupt, irresponsible, amoral, immoral. The Epstein files are a reproach to the entire Western democratic system, which is now, basically what they say is if you're a plutocrat, if you have a lot of money, you're an oligarch, you can get away with anything. There is no accountability. And Trump is the ultimate oligarch. So he's a sort of a symbol of everything that is wrong with the West at the moment. And of course, whether he himself did some of the things that the files suggest he did is another question. But we don't have, and here I guess I come back to, there is no policy, there's no framework, there's no strategy with respect to Iran. There is no debate in the United States about war with Iran. None. Congress is not on its job. Supposedly, before the United States goes to war, there should be a discussion and authorization from Congress. But the Republicans behave like a cult. They will do anything their leader suggests. They just salute and go and don't question him. Of course, they're beginning to a bit because the United States has its own issue in places like Minnesota with legitimacy. If Iranians were Minnesotans, perhaps the violence would not have happened. But anyway, I think the people of Minnesota have been magnificent in their restraint as they object to policies that are clearly unconstitutional and authoritarian. The minute you turn violent, the government answers with violence. And that's what happened in Iran. No debate, no strategy. It's all about Trump. He wants to show that he can run the world. He can run Venezuela, he can run the world, he can run Iran. I suspect he knows almost nothing about Iran.
Absolutely. Ambassador, you've mentioned the case of the Epstein, and we know that the British media is trying to put the blame on Russia and the Russian president, linking Epstein to the Russian president. You remember when the sabotage of Nord Stream pipeline has happened, the British media tried to convince that there was a military expert and the university professor called Michael Clark. I remember he was trying for 5 minutes convincing everybody how it's all in the interest of the Russian government to blow out or to explode their pipeline to Germany. And right now they're trying to do the same. Why is that? And how is
Well,
that
you
possible?
know,
Anybody to
um,
convince anybody of that?
the campaign is not limited to the British press. This is an effort to divert attention from Israel. In other words, it's it's not about blaming Russia. It's about excusing Israel. Epstein was in bed with the Israelis. He was clearly in being manipulated, maybe supported by Mossad, and the emails and other information that's come out clearly documents this. But so this is an effort to whitewash Israel. So how do you do that? Well, you find the all-purpose villain, Putin. He's everything he does is terrible. So therefore, you can blame this on him. I'm surprised I have not blamed it on Khamenei, but maybe that's coming. Anyway, no, that's what this is. It's not, and you see this in the U.S. press as well as the British press, and it's propaganda, it's a sad thing. And of course, as we speak, the Washington Post has basically gone out of business. Major U.S. newspaper was just gutted. We see media, social media like TikTok, being altered to avoid criticism of Israel. Anyway, I don't, the evidence of an Epstein connection with Moscow is very, very small. And the evidence of connection to Tel Aviv and Jerusalem is very, very large. So this is the test. Can you successfully lie and convince everybody about the lie? And I don't think it will work in this case.
Do you think that the Europe is still in that situation with the case of Ukraine?
Well, I mean, telling themselves lies, yes, of course.
Yeah, and lying
Yeah.
and somehow believing their lies.
They are beginning to recognize that the war has been lost, and that Ukraine is going to have to make compromises, and Ukraine cannot get back what it has lost, and it's going to have to offer something else on top of that if it doesn't want the war to continue. And if the war continues, we know what the map of Novorossiya looks like. And it includes Odessa and the whole Black Sea coast. And so we're hearing now that the Russians are preparing to go for Odessa in the spring once the mud has hardened. No, Ukraine is in grave difficulty, and people are beginning to recognize that.
When you look at Europe and their position and their policy, considering Iran, do you think that Europe has tried to define its policy in the West Asia? Are they in the process of defining that? We had the Chancellor of Germany going to Saudi Arabia, trying to somehow replace Russia by Saudi Arabia, but these Arab states in order to provide them with the energy with. But I think that's quite impossible, and it takes a lot of time, if not forever, to replace that. And because they have their limits, I'm talking about the Arab states, and they're not like Russia to be next door, to be that close to Europe. But how do you see the whole policy of the Europeans in the West Asia?
Well, I don't think there is a coherent policy. and I'm not sure that they're capable of producing one. I mean, the European Union seems to be structured in such a way as to frustrate rather than facilitate policy decisions like that. Basically, if you try to do anything bold, audacious uh, for Europe, you're punished. You're not helped. And European political leadership at the moment is very weak. The strongest is Meloni in Italy. Macron is, he's almost gone. Merz has got no great support. Starmer is also in grave trouble. You have right-wing populist parties everywhere coming forward. The Alternative für Deutschland, the Rassemblement National in France, and the UKIP group in Britain, Nigel Farage and so forth. And of course, Meloni herself has a fascist background. So the one government that seems to be enlightened at the moment and decisive is Spain, is Sanchez. He's just done something very wise about integrating immigrants into Spanish society. And he wants no part of the European war with Russia. But anyway, I mean, I think Europeans have come to one conclusion, and that is that they can no longer depend on the United States. That is something they all agree about. The implications of that are that eventually they will have to develop independent policies. But I don't see how they can do it with their current structure. They're too divided. Of course, they look to the Arabs because the Arabs have money. So why wouldn't you look to this is something Iran should be doing, looking for Arab investment. So that may in the end be the solution some to Iran's problems is more regional integration of some kind. And maybe that will happen.
How do you see this? In my opinion, the position or the leverage the Arab states had in the last 30 or 40 years has changed somehow
Oh, yes.
drastically on the
Well,
policies of the United States in the region. How is that going to influence the whole thing?
No, I think the American interests in West Asia generally have been greatly reduced. The United States once took responsibility for maintaining the stability of the global economy, or at least the economy outside the former Soviet bloc. And that meant protecting the oil production in the Persian Gulf. We don't take that responsibility anymore. Americans do not regard ourselves as the world economic regulator or policeman. And second, we're now competitors in the oil production area. The United States is the largest producer of oil in the world. This means that instead of having a stake in supporting Saudi Arabian oil production, for example, we're competing with Saudi Arabia. There's always been a contradiction between OPEC, which was established to raise prices, and American policy, which favors low prices for energy. We now have an administration that actually agrees with the oil producers that there should be no electric vehicles. Everything should be the internal combustion engine. This is ridiculous, but there it is. So what we're left with, there are two interests that we're left with. One is transit, you need to overfly West Asia in order to get between Europe and Asia. And therefore, as long as the United States can overfly the region or go through the Suez Canal with a ship, we are a world power. We can go anywhere in the globe. So we have an interest in maintaining freedom of navigation, transit through the region. And the other issue is Israel, which is rooted in American domestic politics. And the relationship with Israel generates a problem with terrorism because people who oppose Israel do not have air forces and advanced weaponry, and so they resort to unconventional warfare, which we call terrorism. So American interests in the region have been greatly reduced, and we are actually being, as I said earlier, in my view, we are allowing ourselves to be used by Israel for Israel's purposes. And more Americans object to that. You see this in the Republican Party with figures, nationalist figures like Tucker Carlson, who say, why are we doing all these things for Israel? What do they do for us? And of course, you see the Democratic side of the House now very pro-Palestinian and not pro-Israeli anymore. So the one thing they all have in common is nobody understands Iran and everybody thinks Iran is terrible. So, somebody sent me a discussion between some Iranians about setting up a lobby in the United States. And they were laughing. Of course, you can't do that because Iran says the United States is the great Satan, but the Americans believe Iran is the great Satan. So why would you let the Satan establish a lobby? You won't. So that's just where we are. And so that's part of the reason you get this posturing from Trump against Iran. He needs an enemy to divert attention from various other things that are happening or not happening.
I think one of these various other, issues that he's facing is the domestic, as Donald Trump's position and popularity is reducing in the United States. That's why many people are arguing maybe this sort of behavior is coming from that part of the issue with the domestic policy.
It's part of it. I mean, basically, you can't find a foreign policy rationale for, we were talking about what's going on between the United States and Iran. It's all driven by Israel. If there were no Israel, there would be no problem. The United States wouldn't be very concerned about Iran. And to the extent we were concerned, we'd probably be looking for ways to strengthen relations with Iran rather than weaken them. But Israel is in command of our policy, and so you get the result you do. And I don't know what Iran can do about that. The American people seem to be getting sick and tired of it, and that is how it will get corrected. We are still perhaps a democracy. It's not entirely clear how much of a democracy we now are, but we may be enough of a democracy for the people to change the policies of the government. And we'll see.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Ambassador, for being with us today. Great pleasure, as always.
Well, I wish you safe travels home, and happy to continue our dialogue when you get there.